The second weekend of the college football playoff rankings just released. Here you have it. Number 1, Georgia. Dogs back on top. Right now, they'd be playing number 4, TCU. Number 2, Ohio State. They were number 2 coming into the weekend. They would face number 3, Michigan. Then things get a little hairy and a little different as you go 5 through 10. Number 1 was Tennessee. They're now ranked number 5. We welcome in now our college football playoff expert, Jerry Palm, and our national college football writer, Dennis Dodd. Guys, we've heard Kirby Smart say time and time again just how hard it is to stay on top, be the best team in college football. But after that shellacking of Tennessee, looks to be about as easy said as it was done. Dennis, you were there in Athens. I mean, it just feels right after that performance that Georgia is back at number 1.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not voting Georgia number 1 right now, you're not following the sport. They're going to be in everybody's number 1, from the office pool to the CFP. Yeah, I was there Saturday, and it felt transformative to me. Not necessarily with Alabama losing and Nick losing it and everything, and Georgia was going to be number 1. It was that Georgia's setting the standard now. I mean, it's the little things. I've never seen a team tackle as good as they do. And coaches these days will kill for players who will tackle in space. The crowd was fantastic, loudest stadium I've ever been in. And to take a bunch of players who had lost 15 draft picks, 5 of them in the first round, 13 transfers left, and to be like this, we can openly talk about repeating now, obviously. But that wasn't the case over the summer. That wasn't the case over the first 5 or so weeks of the season. But clearly, to me, Georgia's the standard to beat now.
Well, and they had lost so much off that defense last year, and the defense doesn't look like it's missed a beat. And then they lose Nolan Smith, and they go out and shut down one of the most high-powered offenses in college football in Tennessee. So, yeah, Georgia really is the dominant team right now. There's really no debate over number 1, or even really number 2. It's after that where you start splitting hairs and trying to figure out who's who. 1 and 2 didn't take the committee more than about 5 minutes.
Well, on the flip side, it was number 1 Tennessee that fell. The Vols are now number 5 heading into Week 10. Jerry, they dropped 4 spots. So considering that loss, does that feel like the right adjustment to you?
I thought it was a little harsh considering where they had to play that game and who they were playing. But, you know, Tennessee, I think Tennessee, of course, still has the better schedule and the best wins of the 2 teams, you know, them and the 2 teams ahead of them, Michigan and TCU. In a sense, I'm happy for TCU that they made the top 4 because they've been feeling disrespected, and this is definitely a sign of respect. But they're a 7-point underdog at Texas this week. So that tells you what the general public thinks of TCU right now. I still think that Tennessee has a chance to end up in the top 4 at the end. And I probably would have had them still 3rd this week, just based on the fact that they had to play Georgia at Georgia.
No matter what happens, there's going to be a spot for Tennessee if they keep winning in the top 4. Michigan and Ohio State play each other. One of those will be, quote unquote, eliminated. There'll be a spot. Okay, so who's the competition if Tennessee wins out against Missouri, South Carolina, and Vanderbilt? Conference champions, a 1-loss USC or Oregon from the Pac-12, an undefeated TCU or 1-loss TCU from the Big 12. The committee is in that situation. The committee has traditionally favored conference champions in that sort of scenario. But you got to look at Tennessee. The language, I think, in the contract, and Jerry, you can correct me, but the team that has to go in there above a conference champion has to be clearly better. I would submit, if we're talking about those 2 conference champions, that Tennessee, if they went out, would be clearly better. By the time that game comes off, 27-13 right now looks like 50-13 to me. I was there. But I think as the weeks go by, 27-13 wasn't that bad to Georgia. They played 6 ranked teams, beat 5 of them. We got to put them in. So it isn't over for Tennessee at all because there's going to be a spot there for them in the top 4. They just have to keep winning.
Tennessee looking to rebound against Missouri this coming Saturday. You can watch that game as part of a doubleheader on CBS. Kickoff is at noon in Knoxville. Now, Michigan and TCU making their way up the rankings this week. The Wolverines now ranked 3rd with TCU right behind them in 4th. Dennis, what have you seen from these teams, and what is the committee seeing to rank them so high?
Well, Michigan is undefeated, obviously. It's not too hard to figure out. The 4 undefeated teams are in the top 4. So it's only a discussion, like Jerry said, between 3 and 4, and that's going to resolve itself. because again, Michigan and Ohio State are going to play each other. The only drawback, I think, for Michigan is that non-conference schedule, which, they will get over. They just have to win games. If they don't win games, they don't have an argument to get in. TCU is a little bit different spot. As I said, Tennessee's going to be competition if they're a one-loss conference champion. If they're a one-loss and they don't win the championship, that's going to be a problem. But I've loved them all season. I was shocked they weren't in the top 4 last week, and I think the committee had egg all over its face this week when their darlings, Clemson, who didn't deserve to be in the top 4 and proved it, was ahead of TCU, not by a little, but a lot, at number 7 last week. So I think there's something to be said for TCU. This isn't your typical Big 12 team. The Big 12 is deep this year. There have been 4 ranked teams throughout the season. They've won 4 games in consecutive games, not weeks. They had a bye week, but 4 straight games against ranked opponents. And then 3 of those last 3 coming from behind. And then the name Max Duggan is on everybody's lips, and some other players there. So I think TCU is about where they should be, but it's going to be decided. They control their own destiny. Win out, and they're in.
Yeah, the thing about Michigan, and you brought that up a little bit, their strength of schedule is awful. And when you compare their strength of schedule to the other teams in the top, say, 6, it's way behind. It's not close. And that's why I have a problem with Michigan at number 4. Statistically, though, they're very good. They're one of the top offenses, relative offense, relative defense. They're very good in those areas. But just they haven't played anybody except Penn State, and they beat Penn State handily up there in Ann Arbor. But for me, their strength of schedule should hold them back more than it is. But the committee has been consistent through 2 weeks. They like them better than TCU. TCU's schedule is definitely better. They have not been as dominant, and the committee does like to see dominance. So, win this week at Texas, but then they need to take care of some of the lesser teams in this league and put up some bigger numbers on them if they want to stay up in this playoff chase.
This is the first time in CFP ranking history Clemson and Alabama aren't in the top 6. When you think CFP rankings, they're just 2 right there, but respectively, they're 9th and 10th now. Jerry, fair assessment how they're playing to rank Bama and Clemson where they're at this point?
I think it's pretty apparent. Clemson's coming off a loss to Notre Dame in which they were not very competitive. Alabama has 2 losses that are really good losses. A late field goal at Tennessee, an overtime loss at LSU. There's no shame in those losses, but they're losses. And it's weird because we've had 8 years of the college football playoff so far. This is the 9th one. Alabama has been in 7 of the playoffs. Clemson has been in 6 of them, and nobody else has been in more than 4. So, the thought of a college football playoff without these 2 teams is kind of weird. Clemson still has a shot. If they can get to 12-1 and win the ACC, there's a shot for Clemson. Alabama can't even win the SEC West without help, and it starts with beating Mississippi this week, but they're going to need help with LSU. 11-2 SEC champion Alabama, they're probably in, but that's a real long shot at this point.
Well, don't look now. Here comes LSU and Oregon, both making a push the second weekend in the rankings. Tigers just announced 7th and Oregon right ahead of them. These 2, Dennis, are still very much in the thick of things.
Yeah, I just got done writing about this with Brian Kelly at LSU. If you want proof or a reason why Brian Kelly left Notre Dame, you're looking at it right now. He is 7-2 at LSU and controls his own destiny for a national championship 10 weeks in. That would never happen at Notre Dame. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but they do control their own destiny. They control the SEC West. If they win that, then they could beat Georgia or whoever comes out of that and then be in the playoff. They're tap dancing in Baton Rouge right now. So a month ago, they were 4-2 and just gotten beaten by Tennessee by 27 points. 3 wins later, 2 over top 10 teams. Here they are, and they are right knocking at the door, again, controlling their own destiny. You can't keep a 2-loss SEC team out of the playoff this year. I just don't think it can happen. As far as Oregon, I just come back to what I said before. I think the committee is going to have in the back of their mind, if Oregon wins out, do we really want to put Oregon in the top 4 with Georgia and see that game again, potentially? They won't say that out loud, but I think they got to be thinking it. USC, to me, is the better candidate from the Pac-12. Their only loss is by 1 point on the road to a really, really good Utah team. So if USC keeps winning and Oregon keeps winning, we'll see what happens. And it may be decided in the championship game, but I still think USC is the better candidate to get to the playoff.
There's only 3 weeks left in the college football season. Dennis, who are you foreseeing being in the top 4 that first weekend of December?
Well, I'm pretty much what I have now. I have TCU number 3. I have Michigan 4. I have Tennessee getting in at number 4 because Michigan and Ohio State are going to eliminate one another. I have Tennessee number 2. I have let's start over. Georgia 1, Ohio State 2, TCU 3, and Tennessee 4.
I actually have the exact same 4 teams. I've had Tennessee number 4 ever since they beat Alabama. So I think that Tennessee can get in with 11-1. They need some things to happen in their favor in order to make that happen. And one of those is that Georgia has to be undefeated. But I think Tennessee can sneak in at 11-1. I don't think Michigan or Ohio State can get to 11-1, but especially Michigan because of that schedule.
All right, that's our Jerry Palm and Dennis Dodd breaking down the second CFP rankings. Guys, we appreciate the time and the insight. Now let's take a look at the odds to make the college football playoff. Georgia, the resounding favorite, minus 1,800, followed by Ohio State, minus 650. Tennessee, minus 160. Right now they are number 5, so they're on the outside looking into the top 4. But these other guys, plus odds to make it. But we now welcome in Josh Pate, host of Late Kick with Josh Pate. We're talking here these top rankings, Josh. I mean, you got to keep winning to stay in the top 4. Losers, as we see, are taking a tumble down the list. To you, who were some of the winners and losers from the second CFP ranking?
I think it's amazing that the thing that's freshest in our mind is watching Tennessee lose last weekend in Athens. And a loss that many, including myself, Dennis was there, we would call kind of a one-sided affair, and yet you just showed the odds. Tennessee is still minus 160 to make the playoff. They're sitting here, number 5 right now. And I think what's the most interesting to me as we start to get down the stretch these final few weeks, the committee's telling you already, even with that loss baked in, we view them as one of the 5 best teams in the country. Do we get to a spot where we're measuring head-to-head Tennessee against a Pac-12 champ? And does it matter which Pac-12 champ that is? Do we get to a spot where we're measuring Tennessee against a Big 12 champion? Because the rules are that conference championship is supposed to matter. And when we bake it in, it vaults you up a little bit. But if the committee still says we think that non-conference champ is as strong as you, all of a sudden you get these different factors in play, which is why I think what Dennis just said is pretty prophetic. There's a difference, whether it should matter or not, whether you get an Oregon Pac-12 champ with a 7-touchdown loss on their resume versus a USC as the Pac-12 champ with late season wins over UCLA and Notre Dame, and their only loss is close on the road. That probably matters in some of those head-to-heads.
I also think it's interesting the timing of the loss, right? You think about Tennessee, Georgia this past weekend, but Michigan, Ohio State the last weekend of the year. I wonder how that would play into it. But Josh, for you, who is a loser then of this ranking?
I think it's got to be Clemson. I don't think it was a shock that they were all the way down at number 10, but I think it kind of solidifies, at least in my mind, the ACC is out of this. North Carolina was in the teens, but I just don't see the trajectory. I don't see the path there for them, even if they were to win out. And they're probably going to the ACC title game. They'll probably play Clemson there, and that game would probably be a slight lean Clemson in terms of point spread. But even if they win that game, I just don't know that there's enough meat on that resume bone. But going back to Clemson for just a second, this is a team that when they came into the year, there were so many questions. I thought for a team that had racked up multiple national titles, they and Dabo Swinney were some of the most questioned entities in the sport because Dabo, remember, in the spring and summer, he had some moves to make on his staff. He had to replace his offensive coordinator and his defensive coordinator, and that's Clemson. So they could have gone outside for those hires, and he was emphatic. He said, I'm not going outside. I'm promoting from within. And he promoted some guys with no coordinator experience. And a lot of us scratched our head, but at least at this desk, I was willing to say, hey, Dabo knows his staff more than I do. Well, now that you get blanked, just throttled on the road, no one saw it coming against Notre Dame, now some of those same questions start to crop up. This offense hasn't looked to the degree it used to look all year. That defense that we thought was a very, very formidable unit got run all over last week to the tune of 280 some odd yards on the ground. So Clemson's a big loser because, even though they're out of the playoff, that's one side of the coin. Now we have to start listening to the questions come season's end on the other side of that coin.
Look ahead 3 weeks from now, Josh. Who are you putting in your top 4 when the final rankings are finally announced?
So I rolled the dice over here a second ago. They did come up Georgia #1, so congrats to the Bulldogs. I got Michigan winning the Big Ten right now, and so if that were to happen, I think the Wolverines are a slam dunk to be the #2 team. I think Oregon's rolling. They got an interesting game this week against Washington, then they play Utah next week, then they play Oregon State, and then they would go to a Pac-12 championship game. Everybody's looking at that resume right now. I'm tacking on 4 potential high-quality wins from now until Selection Sunday. Oregon would have a phenomenal resume. If they do have the Pac-12 championship, I think they'd be #3 there. And then I put Tennessee in there #4. I want you to look at what that would mean in the semifinal, though. That would mean a Georgia-Tennessee rematch, at which point we get conspiracy theoriters out the wazoo saying they don't want a rematch in the semifinal, to which I respond with, do you think they'd rather take their chances at another all-SEC national championship? I don't think so. So if Tennessee's in there, somehow, some way, I think they're matching them up with the Dogs round 1.
All right, a lot to look forward to. Josh, we appreciate the time and the insight. Thank you. All right, let's take a look at the latest odds to win the college football playoff. The favorite, again, reigning champions, Georgia, +110, followed by Ohio State at +180. Then the value increases, starting with Michigan at +850. And for more from Josh, make sure you download the Late Kick with Josh Pate podcast. He delivers college football game breakdowns, rapid reactions, along with the occasional gambling and recruiting.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.